Whoopsie daisies, wrong promo. That's what happens when you go live. So let's try this all over again. I was having some tech issues behind the scene, so I had more than one with the same name and made the mistake. So my real guest is Shanil Virani, who I'm very excited for you guys to meet. He's an astronomer and he's done so many wonderful things. Just let me go ahead and bring him in and let him fix my mistake there. So, hi, welcome to the E-Spot. We're here. Like I'm trying to kind of walk astronauty, which is kind of hard to do.
Right.
I'm like so distracted because you're a real friend of mine that I didn't turn on any of my lights. I'm just now realizing. So we're really having a fun time today.
That's right. You got to
all natural. 1 year later, celebrating the E-Spot. So I'm so thankful.
Happy 1 year anniversary.
Thank you so much. And to spend it with a friend is nice, especially one that's out of this world.
Well,
well, I guess out of the state at least.
That's right.
So please tell everyone at the E-Spot a little bit about yourself and how you got started in astronomy.
Yeah, so my name is Shanil, pronounced like the perfume, just spelled differently. And I've always been interested in astronomy. You know, it's one of these things that, you know, often you can remember like these pivotal impacts and pivotal moments in your life. And I remember as, you know, a third and fourth grader, in fact, in middle school, learning about rotation versus revolution when we talk about the solar system and the order of the planets, and just being incredibly mesmerized by how we could figure these out. I remember going into the library and we'd see these incredible photos that you see from space. You see those incredible colors that you see from like Hubble images now, and just being like, what is this? You know, what is this telling us? What's going on here? Just being that curiosity of trying to figure what this thing was going on. So that's always been, you know, kind of my passion. So I've been lucky enough to be able to follow that. For the last 20 years now, I guess, 15 years, I've been more of an educator than a practicing scientist doing fundamental research. And so that's been a lot of fun, you know, being able to talk to both students and the public alike about science, what it is, why it matters, and who gets to do it. Because sometimes we put a lot of roadblocks. We say science is open to all, but sometimes our words, our caricatures, and the things we do suggest otherwise.
It's so cool. So when you first thought of the fact that I want to be an astronomer, I'm sure you didn't know this is the path to take to become an astronomer. So how did you even figure that out? Was there someone that kind of told you what path to take, or did you know someone to mentor to follow that path? And I'm glad that you mentioned that media had kind of an effect on you by seeing different movies and things, because it's so important, I think, to be able to see those images to inspire you to become something maybe you would never otherwise know existed.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's probably one of the more powerful tools we have in our toolbox, you know, how we depict scientists and people that are doing this work. And that has been 180 degrees different from, you know, when you and I were young to what young kids see today, which is great. It's much more empowering and positive. But you remember, you know, in the 80s, it was, you know, movies like Revenge of the Nerds, you know, and if you had any kind of affinity towards math or science, you were treated as different and often invited to be bullied on. You know, being a geek or a nerd was a negative. And today, you know, maybe thanks to Facebook and social media and those kinds of tools, being a geek or a nerd is something to be celebrated. So that's been different. You know, it's a 180-degree role reversal. But your point about, you know, how do you get entree, or how do you figure out what you want to do, is actually a really important one, even to this day. I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school, forget college. And I didn't know what engineering was. You know, that was a word I heard amongst my peers in high school. And certainly there were a lot of kids in my class that, you know, were saying they wanted to go to school to be an engineer, but I didn't know really what that is. And even for me, I wanted to do space science, and I was really interested in the stars and the galaxies, but I thought that meant being an astronaut. So when I was in middle school, I thought, okay, I want to be an astronaut. And then I realized, no, astronauts just work in space. They don't really get to study space. That's what astronomy is, right? So so you're right. I had to go through that, and I had to learn through that. And that wasn't in, you know, the wheelhouse of my family's background, because again, you know, these weren't certain conversations that they were familiar with. But I was lucky. I went to a really good school where those kinds of conversations could happen. But there were still deficiencies. It really wasn't until I got to college that I even understood what engineering is. And it's a shame because, today when we think about it, we just landed, a $2 billion SUV-sized rover inside of a crater on the fourth planet out from the sun. And so engineers get to send their toys now around the solar system and do really cool things. And it's important for kids that, may be interested in science and engineering to know what the difference is and to know what the pathways are, and that so they can play as well. I can't hear you, Camille. Oh, are you muted?
I was trying to make sure that my excitement didn't interrupt your story, so I muted myself. So forgive me for that. But I'm so glad you brought up about toys as well, because I've had this ongoing battle almost with one of the toy makers where they keep saying they're going to increase more dolls of color to represent like more of America in that sense, where they'll have every couple of years they'll throw out a girl of the year or so on that's Asian or Hispanic or Black, but it's like $20 later they'll throw one of us again, or $20 later they throw, and it's like they keep saying, oh, we're gonna do more inclusive, and I have loved that they did a Hispanic character, or at least I guess she could pass for whatever brown complexion that you may be, but they had her as an astronaut, and they had her like a whole tech thing, but or a whole rover, I do believe, as well, and all these wonderful fun toys for her to play with. But the price point was at a point where it's like, that's not reasonable for most children, period. Right. But then to also be so excluded and finally have something that included you, like I was able to get my daughter the doll for sure, but it was like $350 for all the other stuff like that you may play with for 6 months, maybe, like you just don't know. But I love that they're making more things accessible to girls and really showing all girls that is important. And I'm glad you brought that up, especially with you saying that you were the first in your family to graduate from high school. Like there's still so many people that they're still the first in their generation. And I think the general consensus is that everybody's equal. Everybody's had an even chance, that everybody can just pull themselves up from their boots and make it. But when you don't see anything that inspires you in that direction, or you don't get the support in school or media or wherever. And I'm just really glad to have you here to just reconfirm that, how important that was in your journey to make it, but also that Hollywood and education and so on realize how important that is, that they show those images and keep it up. Like you can't slack on it.
And it's, what you said, Camille, is well said and very important to say. It's a little bit surprising and almost shocking to me that in 2021, we're still having conversations like this. You would have thought that, these would have been conversations we would have had a decade or 2 decades ago, but apparently we're still doing it. And, if we want to change attitudes towards science, if we want to change attitudes, towards immigrants, if you want to get in that kind of political context, we want to change attitudes towards anything, role models matter. It's probably the most powerful tool that we have in our toolbox, and you can't be what you can't see. So if we're always putting, the caricature of a scientist is the white man with crazy hair in a lab coat, right? Often bent on world destruction. That's a stereotype.
Yeah, Back to the Future or any superhero movie. Yeah, for sure.
That's right? That's still a stereotype that perpetuates to this day. In fact, that was there was a landmark study that was done actually about 15 years ago. They went to urban schools outside of Chicago, and they asked them exactly that question. Draw a scientist. They were going to, this was 6th or 7th grade class, they were going to visit a national lab just outside of Chicago, a particle lab. And before they went to the lab and actually got to meet some of the scientists involved in this research, the group had this idea, let's see what they think a scientist is and what they do. And by and large, almost every student drew this picture of this white male, lab coat, glasses, socially awkward, inept, right? This caricature that we often see propagated or used to see propagated in pop culture. And that was 180 degrees different from what they saw when they visited the lab. And that was some of the pictures that they'd asked the kids to draw pictures before and afterwards. And I'll send you the link if you want to share with the audience afterwards.
Absolutely.
And the pictures that they drew after the interaction that was so powerful. They drew pictures of women. They drew pictures that looked like themselves, like these students. And they saw one of the most powerful things they said, that I remember this young girl actually saying, was that Scientists look like me and do fun things like me. They're just curious about the world. And that's exactly right. There is no prerequisite to science. The only prerequisite I like to say is curiosity. Everything else, the math and the science, you can learn. But we tend to psych ourselves out, right? If we don't get that math problem in 7th grade, right off the bat, we kind of think of ourselves, math isn't for us or science isn't for me. I even
or even with women, I would say, excuse me to interrupt, but they'll just automatically, oh, she's a girl, so she must not be good at math and science.
So you're right. But it's even worse than that, because, that could be, a professor saying that about a young woman, having that kind of negative, wrong view. But oftentimes you'll have young women articulating that same argument. I remember I had a young woman come to my office hours. I teach a gen ed class, so that these students always have to take one of my classes in order to graduate for science breadth and depth requirements. And so there's a bimodal distribution I always get in my classes. I get a peak of first-year students that want to get the gen ed out of the way right away, which makes sense, and then you get to go on with their college career. And then I get another peak of students that they're in their 4th year. And it's the 2nd semester of their 4th year. Yeah. They need to take this class in order to walk to get their degree. And I had this young woman come into my class saying, math doesn't run in my family. It's like, there's no gene for math. There's no gene for doing a layup either, right? You work at doing a work at a layup or hitting the volleyball. You work at that, and you have to work at math and science the same way. My reference is going to be dated, but Michael Jordan and Wayne Gretzky are the best, or were the best, in their respective fields, not because they sat on the couch for 7 hours a day and then went on the court or went on the ice. They practiced their craft for hours on end every day. And math and science isn't any different. Just because you don't get it doesn't mean you're not good at it. It just means you have to work at it. And so that, we don't tell that. We don't, if we don't get it on the right first try, we come up with excuses. Mm-hmm. I think your other point, though, about film, that has been the most empowering thing. When we were young, trying to find good science fiction films were few and far between, especially ones that have positive role models. Maybe one reason why Star Trek, the original Star Trek, has made such an impact for many generations is that it showed people what we like to think people truly are, right? Open, representative, and it's the ideas that flow to the surfaces. Difference between gender and ethnicities weren't part of the conversation. It was, what was the ideas? What was the substance of what they were saying? Mm-hmm. And that's a role, that's an ideal we still seek to achieve. But what has happened in the last 20 years is we have great films, like The Martian, like Interstellar, like Hidden Figures, like Contact, which is
Dr. McStuffin, even in that sense, for even little kids. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So we have role models now, and we have people that are like me and you that get to do cool things, but they're not Six Sigma deviants. This idea of a bell curve, right? If you take people's heights or weights or intelligence, apparently they have like this very nice bell curve, and the middle is where the mean is, the average of the distribution, and then we can characterize how big that distribution is by how many standard deviations somebody is away. That's what Six Sigma refers to. And I had somebody characterize me like that scientists are way at the tail end of the bell curve, and I just rejected that kind of caricature because it suggests that only weird people do science, and I don't think that that's fundamentally true. I think it's the people that are curious that get to do it, and I think there's a danger in also making those kinds of aspersions, is that it tells us that we're different, that we're somehow different from everyone else, and I don't believe that to be true. I think scientists, to quote Albert Einstein, the only thing that makes them unique is that they're passionately curious, and they seek to understand why the world is the way it is and not some other way.
Thank you so much for just reconfirming everything I wanted to hear, but to hear it from someone as intelligent and that can back it up with the science and the data as well. Because I was a sociology major, so when you were saying all the things about the bell curve, and I was like, I remember those days and the statistics of it all. And so, like, people
I'm sorry to bring up previous trauma.
No. I loved sociology. It was my favorite. That's why I majored in it. Just because you gotta see like what not only the different groups and cultures, like how certain things just go about. Because I remember the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes video and just picking out the dolls. But when you were saying about picking out or drawing out the scientists, it reminded me of that. And there's a new documentary that I just was privy to getting a sneak peek of it yesterday. And it talks about picture a scientist, and it's talking about women becoming scientists and the importance of or how important that is, because when we think of on a grander scale of different places where women are leaders, they do a better job. Like the country is better off. Like everywhere that there's a woman prime minister, COVID is big time slash, you know,
Right.
like there's that element where women need to be at the table because just better things happen. I don't know if men just start operating better because we're around, or it's just the fact that we're just that, you know, 50%
I think whenever
of us.
we have diverse voices at the table, we always win. Because when we have diverse voices at the table, you know, we're not locked in our little tunnel vision thinking we have all the answers and we're trying to search for that answer in our head. We're hearing other people come up with other ideas that allow us to accomplish the same kind of goal. So I think diversity, diverse in the viewpoints, diverse in ethnicity, diverse in gender, diverse even in socioeconomic backgrounds. All of that diversity matters because it brings a view to a table that we otherwise may fall blind to. I'll tell you that, when I was at James Madison University, I created a summer space camp. I was the planetarium director, and this was a state-of-the-art $2 million planetarium. And because it's a public university, they followed the academic calendar, which meant for 4 months out of the year during the summer months, it was dormant, it was closed. And because when I was middle school, high school, I wanted to go to the real space camp, the one in Huntsville, Alabama, for throughout my entire time. But my parents couldn't afford to send me; it was just far too expensive. The tuition was exorbitant, but then you had to factor in flight and accommodation. And I was in Canada at the time, so the exchange rate also made it at disadvantage. And so here I am at this university that has a state-of-the-art planetarium, and they said, well, you don't have to do anything over the summer. And I could not do that. To my conscience, to be silent for 4 months when we could do something really cool, I couldn't do that. So I started a summer camp. And I used the word space explorers. And that name was chosen specifically because one of the things that we often do when we talk about science is that sometimes when we talk about a science camp, and you see a lot of science camps now starting, is that they're still self-selective. Parents will choose Bob or Sally to attend because they may have an interest in science, thinking that, because they may not show an interest in watching Doc McStuffins or something else or Back to the Future, that they don't have an interest in science. So that kind of self-selection still happens. And so with having a name like Space Explorers, if someone's interested in technology, should they attend? Absolutely. If someone's interested in biology, would they find common activities? Absolutely. Physics, astronomy, yes. Right? Space Explorers is engineering too. You can think about devising and developing new technologies, new spacecraft, new robots, new rovers to be sent. So I like the fact that Space Explorers was nebulous and fuzzy. It wasn't a science camp which you can bring your stereotypes to the table. And I'll also tell you that the very first summer I created one, I had this mom come up to me. I would do some of our planetarium shows on Friday nights that I would host them. And I had this single mom come up to me. And she would tell me, my daughter, who at the time she was in 3rd grade, loves coming to the planetarium, but she doesn't want me to tell her friends where we go on Saturdays. And isn't that weird? I mean, I wasn't very quick on the uptake, so I didn't really kind of probe. I just said, okay, that's weird. I said that internally. I didn't say that to the mom. Right. She was searching for things that she could do with her young daughter at the time because she was showing an interest in science. And she was running at the end of her rope in terms of what she could do. You talked about that too, some of the struggles parents have. And so I was telling the mom that, we're thinking of doing the summer camp at the planetarium. It'll be focused on technology and engineering and science, and maybe she should consider signing her daughter up. And so this turned into a Facebook conversation over the next several months while she talked to her daughter, and the daughter was very reluctant. She did not want to participate. She did not want to enroll. She did not want to sign up, no matter how much the mom encouraged her to do so. So finally, we get to the point where we're like 2 weeks out from the start of the camp, and she still hasn't committed. And I tell the mom that to sign her up, and if by Monday at the first break or by lunch on that Monday she's uncomfortable, does not want to be there, I will give her my cell phone. She can call you. You can come pick her up, and I'll refund the tuition costs. No questions asked. Yeah. There's no expectations whatsoever. The student had a great time. She spent the whole week. Okay. And then, of course, the truth comes out, right? Because, when you go back to school in September, the teacher asks you to write that letter, right? That essay. What did you do this summer, right? That really had the most impact that you really wanted to tell about. And she wrote about her science camp experience. And in that letter is where she said, in 3rd grade, a boy told her, girls don't do science. And so she had internalized that comment from some 3rd grade boy for why she didn't want her friends knowing where she went on Saturdays, for why she didn't want to attend a space camp, because she thought it would just be boys, and she wouldn't find somebody like her, someone with her kind of background, with her kind of interest represented. And of course, I'm not going to say it was 50-50, but it was certainly, 60-40, or maybe, 2 out of 3 were boys, but there were certainly women, young girls there. And she found a voice and she found a role, and now she's, wants to do science when she gets to college. She's, a high school student now. And so it told me that we had to do a lot more of this. And so we started a program at the Planetarium. It's called Science Sunday for Girls. This comes back to your question about your point about role models. And that was because, the studies tell us that, if we were trying to change attitudes towards science, especially we're trying to get more young women to go into STEM fields, that, we have to start in middle school. That was literature at the time. It's suggesting we have to start even earlier than that. And so we started doing the Science Sunday for Girls, and we were targeting young girls in kindergarten to 6th grade. And the idea is we wanted them to see people like them, that you're not weird for having questions for why the sky is blue. You're not weird for thinking why Venus is so hot, even though it's the second planet from the sun. But it was also important that they see role models for them to be able to project onto. So even though Science Sunday for Girls was my idea, was my baby, it was something in the background that I coordinated, I wasn't there on Sundays. We had female faculty members that would step up, and most of the counselors, the students that were there, couldn't tell a male student that couldn't participate, of course, but we tried to make sure there were young women, college students, that were doing science, engineering, or even there were pre-service teachers that wanted to teach that were represented there, because role models matter. It's the most important tool we have in changing attitudes, besides media.
And I mean, that's amazing that you did that, and to have that, to like self-assessment in a way, to realize how important it is to have the women instructors teach it as well. Because my daughter, she's one of those that loved Legos and like had to do the Lego camp, like wanted to do everything Lego. Like she could spend hours putting Legos together and just absolutely loved it. And then they killed the sci-fi versions for girls. And so then we had to try to find other things that kind of fit in that area. And so I was like buying stuff off of eBay and everywhere else. But what really crushed her, I think, the most was that even though she would sign up for all these different camps, because there was predominantly male teachers, they would kind of resonate more with the male students, because they would both be talking about the same kind of things that they enjoyed. They both played maybe the same video game or watched the same shows, as opposed to her might have taught. She probably was just as interested in Marvel and those different things, but would be overlooked because she was a girl. And
that's right.
It wasn't until she started this year, actually, she has a female science teacher.
Right.
And I can see a big difference in her as far as just feeling more empowered with that. But even when you were talking earlier about the little girl who said she didn't want to do science because a boy had told her she couldn't. When my daughter was in preschool, a little girl told her that she could never be a princess because all princesses are blonde.
Right.
And so she started and before then she went to Disney and told the princesses there her favorite princess was herself. Because
that's awesome.
Because I had raised her so well, I thought. And then it just took that one girl getting in her head. And for a while there, she wanted all her dolls blonde. She was like, nope, they can't be a princess because they're, so I think it's really important for Hollywood to realize how much weight they have with the images they put out there, how it has real life effect, that these different girls and boys are believing what they're seeing and implementing it or rehashing it. It's not always that they're learning it from their parents or in their home, but they're seeing it on the different, whether it's video games or TV or show or books, they all have that place where they can reconfirm negatives or they can change and inspire and really encourage positive change in the world. So I'm glad that you're giving more examples of how we can do that.
Absolutely. And you're right. That's how we affect real change, positive change. My daughter, my sister,
children.
Well, thank you. My sister, however, is 7 years younger than me. But so when she was born, and at least for the first several years, when she was in that kind of toddler phase, my mom worked 2 jobs. So, I was the eldest of 3. And so it kind of responsibilities fell onto me to look after her and make sure that, she was taking care of and all these kinds of other chores that come along with being the eldest in the family. But I remember there was a Barbie doll she wanted. She was like 5 or 6. And, it's one of those Barbie dolls you pull on the string and it said something. And it said, this doll, particular, this Barbie doll said, when you pull on a string, would say, "Math is tough, let's go shopping." This is the early 80s, mid 80s. And that was such a, nefarious comment to say, because it's telling, little girls like my sister, and, she was 5 or 6, that, first of all, math isn't for her, and that her responsibility should just be to go shopping, right?
Yeah,
that's what
consumerism.
Yeah, and so so this was it was pervasive, and you would see this everywhere. These kind of caricatures in video games. If you remember the video games
And
from 20
TV
years
shows,
ago,
yeah, it was everywhere.
Right? How are women portrayed? If there is a woman character, what qualities, attributes? What is her character? Is she the smart one? Is she the scientist? Is she the engineer? Or is she the eye candy? Right?
No, I think back to Weird Science, where they created a woman just for their entertainment and for her, like their robot in a way. Or even when you mentioned Revenge of the Nerds, where like they were basically drugging girls and stuff. And
that's exactly,
it's just like you're thinking back, or Pretty in Pink, like you look back now and you're like, oh my God, they were setting women up, but they were also setting men up to be these very toxic images where they were promoted to be very macho and not to be smart and to just be these brunt, horrible animals in a way. And, and not like, and just even thinking now with greed being good and so on, as opposed to, hey, where's the Batman? Why isn't Jeff Bezos Batman, or trying to cure stuff with all his billions of dollars, or make the world better, fight crime, fix education, homelessness? I mean, I could go on and on, but
it's true. But that's why, there are films like Contact, which, came out in the 90s, but is based on a Carl Sagan book, before that. But, Jodie Foster plays the lead character, right? And so at the time there was a lot of foreground that was being broken, right? It was a female scientist, and she was going to be this lead in this film about making what that first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence would look like, right? And what kinds of things we'd have to go through. And it was such a groundbreaking movie because it showed a powerful young woman in that kind of role. But then, you cut 15 years, 20 years later, and you have a film like Hidden Figures, right? We have 3 women that are pathfinding in 3 different roles, right? In 3 different ways. And it's important, I think, for young Americans, both male and female, to see what that was like. That, that this idea that maybe we're somehow different and, it's postmodern, we're post-racism, that obviously I think the last 4 years have shown that's definitely not true. But I think that's where these movies are really, really important, because we have made a lot of advances.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say we have made a lot of advances, but there's still more to be done.
And I think, even as you said, in the last 4 years, we've learned, I think even in the last 6 months, I think there's been a reckoning where people realized that there was 2 different Americas, where white America didn't even realize how much different people of color experienced America, just how much more we had to overcome, as far as, like you said, you being the first within your family to graduate from high school. And I'm an immigrant by default because I'm a military child, but I didn't move to America until I was 12. So I had the opportunity to see what it was like to go through ESL as an American and see how badly that program is and how badly it is treated, to find out how much I was bullied for speaking different, for having an accent, for being different. Like I saw that, and a lot of it was because of the movies. And so for me, the movies was not only an escape of like getting to see people with accents like myself on TV, but also getting to see brown people and doing things that maybe one day I could do. I could be a talk show host. I could be in Dynasty getting drinks on the rocks, stuff. But I just really want for our children and the next generation to have that same type of inspiration, because with all the negative that has come out about what's been going on with all the different movements and Stop Asian Hate, and just last year it was like Stop Muslim Hate. We were part of it seems like every year it's a different group that, or not even, and now it's like every 3 months or whatever, it's a different group that's targeted. And how great it would be if Hollywood made a point of trying to collaboratively show a unifying of groups and just trying to show a way how America could be with that melting pot, but also showing that
that is
give
a
that inspiration
wonderful point.
again.
It is. And I think, you know, there's a lot of beautiful sentiments in what you said. You know, and you know, the two Americas is maybe why, you know, when you have people, you know, that are creating advertising campaigns or new dolls or new whatever, they don't recognize that diversity in the product that they're creating matters, is because they come from that America where they don't see people, right?
Yeah.
And so that seems foreign to them. You know, in Star Trek, you know, one of the fourth most important character in that show, remember, was Lieutenant Uhura. I don't know if you remember or watched, right? Yeah.
Right,
well,
right
I can't do that, but you know, she's a Uhura is a Swahili word which, you know, means freedom. And
yeah, I remember she's the first interracial kiss, so I do remember that part. Yeah, with
Shatner, that's right. But you know, her story is also incredibly powerful. You know, the Star Trek, the original series, you know, played for something like 3 years, I think, in the mid '60s. And after the first year, you know, the actress that portrayed Lieutenant Uhura said she didn't want to do it. She wasn't enjoying the experience, and she had a stage and theater background, and she wanted to return to Broadway and return to her first love. And she was at a dinner cocktail, and she had already told Gene Roddenberry, the producer and director of Star Trek, that she wasn't coming back. And so she was at this cocktail later that evening and was telling this other important person about her decision that she was leaving Star Trek and be returning to stage. And that person said, "You can't do that. You can't leave Star Trek. Don't you see? For the first time, you have an equal role. You're being portrayed as an equal." That person that told her not to leave was Martin Luther King. And Star Trek was the only show that he and his wife would let his kids watch, because they had a black woman in a role, powerful role, an equal role, and that was the future that he wanted his kids to inhabit. And so that was the show she wanted to see. So it was actually, you know, Martin Luther King telling her not to leave that made her stay. And of course, you know, she went on to have this incredible career as Lieutenant Uhura, but then also was critically involved in bringing diverse people to NASA and into the astronaut corps. You know, she was part of the committee that selected Mae Jemison, who was the first African-American female to go into space, right? So she had this incredible pivotal role. But I always think it's that kind of serendipity that comes from a conversation at a cocktail party, yearning her not to leave that role. Because you're of these powerful forces that sometimes influence how we make these decisions.
No, you're so right, because I was thinking when you were saying about Mae Jemison, or Mae.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. Is now I can't remember his name, but the Challenger, he was the first Black astronaut that went up in the Challenger that exploded.
Yeah.
Well, I was in school like many other kids when that happened, and I remember thinking, never want to be a scientist or never want to be an astronaut. So it can go either way.
Yeah.
It can go either way. But I want to make sure we get to this quick point, because you mentioned Martian as well, and because of you, I did watch that film, and wonderful. I was so happy I did, because I have to admit, Matt Damon, he kind of pissed me off, and I was like anti-Matt Damon, hadn't watched most of his films after an experience where on the documented Green Light, he, much like, because he lived in his own bubble of America in Boston, he was giving a Black director woman a really hard time about, oh no, we give everybody an equal opportunity. Everybody has an equal chance. And, you know, he of course apologized and realized his errors. And watching the movie, I was kind of like, I don't want to watch Matt Damon. It's all about him being macho. And then my favorite comes out and I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but there's a wonderful redhead woman, my Jessica Chastain, who's always an advocate for and an ally and just an amazing actress. And it was like a reverse princess moment is all I'm going to say, in the sense of the saving of everything. And I was just like, again, thank you so much for recommending that movie, because I really was like, I don't like digging my heels, didn't want to do it. Like, so I just, again, if you're contemplating not watching it, please do, because it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. The film and, you know, this conversation is really important, because there's a new Columbus 1492 race that's happening now that doesn't get a lot of attention. And you think about, 1492, you know, we were told in middle school or elementary school, right? Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and discovered the Americas, even though he never set foot in
Well,
America,
I'm kind of
right?
lumpy descent, so I have a different version we're told. But
Well,
yeah.
okay, yeah. I'm playing up that because that's what I was told, right? And we know that none of it is true. But the
Right.
arguments against his voyage, right, were the same arguments we hear today. He was the third monarch, right? He was Italian, if I remember correctly, by citizenship, but he approached, the monarchy in Spain and in England and France. None of them would fund, or excuse me, Spain did, but England and France and Italy, none of them would fund his voyage because, what are you going to do when you get there? What are you going to find? There's nothing there. And I say that because, of course, there's a race to space today. We have, Jeff Bezos and, his aerospace, Blue Origin. We have Elon Musk and SpaceX, Eric Schmidt and Larry Page of Google have their own aerospace called Planetary Resources. And you think about, well, these are just billionaires and they have nothing to do to spend their money on. And maybe that's true, but there's a different reason why they're funding their own aerospace companies and are racing to space. And it's because they've done the calculation. If you look at, the technology that goes into your phone and a lot of our high-tech devices rely on these rare earth minerals. They're called rare because they're rare to find, but they're abundant in asteroids. They're abundant on the lunar surface. And so there's a race to space because it's this age-old driver, greed. There is literally 10 times the world's GDP, 10 times the world's GDP to be mined on asteroids and resources. That's why they're racing to space. It isn't because of philanthropy. It isn't because they want to see the first human on Mars, as they might say. It's because of greed. And that's happening now. And within our children's future, there will be habitats on the moon. China and Russia last week signed an agreement to work together, to develop together, to create a habitat on moon. At Mars, we have satellites from India and the United Arab Emirates in orbit around it, right? So what has changed since the space race in the late 60s, early 70s, which was a two-country race between the United States and the former Soviet Union? It was a proxy war, right, over who was better. What has changed this century, however, is that this is no longer driven by countries. It's driven by commerce, and it's driven by greed, and we're seeing new players come into the mold, and we're seeing that play out. I'm confident by the end of the century we will have human civilizations on Mars and on the moon, and I'm confident they'll go there because of greed and these resources to develop. The only thing that I don't know about the people that will live on Mars and on the moon is what flag will be on their shoulder. Will it be an American flag, or will it be an Indian flag? Will it be a UAE flag? Will it be a Russian flag? We're going. It's whether or not the United States wants to cede its leadership that it's cultivated over the last 100 years to other players. But we're going, and that's playing out. It's happening now. We see it happening with SpaceX launching these, new prototype because they're building the arsenal that's going to take humans to the moon and then later to Mars. So it's playing out now, but we don't see it being covered or discussed.
So just to play into my Hollywood dreams.
Advocate?
Oh. Well, no, I hate that word. Like, I hate being devil. I'm like, why? No, devil doesn't need an advocate. But no, just to play up my Hollywood dreams here. Will this be like a Total Recall, you think, type movie? Westworld? Like, what do you think, Mars? Or how do you think that's going to work as far as habitats? Because,
It's a great question. Do you watch The Expanse as a relative? I mean, I just started watching it, but it's they've 5 seasons of it apparently.
Oh.
But The Expanse imagines humans living on, of course, Mars, Ceres, which is the largest rock in the asteroid belt, but also other human outposts amongst the moons of Saturn and Jupiter as well. But they're at war with these different factions, and that's a reflection, I think, of human history prior to the up to and including the 20th century. We were at war with different countries, different people, different ideas. I don't think the future is going to be what it looked like for much of our existence. It's maybe my naivete and gullibility. I want to believe in the future of Gene Roddenberry, where humans have overcome the inequities we see in our society. They have solved these inequities of racial animosity, these inequities of wealth, the inequities of opportunity, and that the future is going to be what we see in Star Trek, where it's not driven by people of different parts of one corner of the globe against the other, but it's human species. That's the overwhelming and underlying common united attribute. So I don't see that happen.
I'm surprised. Sorry to cut you off, but just thinking about COVID and how we met in that sense, like I'm kind of surprised that when, like sometimes when we're all battling a unified enemy, like Independence Day or something, we kind of get together. And so I was kind of surprised with COVID that it became a political thing and we didn't come together against the unified enemy of being COVID and protecting ourselves and, each other. It was more about freedoms and other things I won't go into. But how do you think, as a scientist and as someone that really looks at the data and so on, how do you think we can go make that happen and make this utopia? Because I'm all in. What do I have to do to make this happen?
Well, to the extent that science does become like this wedge issue, right? Mm-hmm. You can understand why there was maybe a pushback against wearing masks, a pushback against social distancing. It comes back to actually one of the things you mentioned earlier, that when you have women at the table, you tend to have a better product, whatever that product may be. I think when you have people that have a formal education, either graduated from high school, but more importantly, maybe graduated from college and have had different exposure to science and math, I think the conversations are different. I don't think you can have wedge issues at play. And I think that diminishes the argument from one side about science. I think when we understand science and that understand that it's not a tool, to divide, but largely a tool to understand how the world works the way it is, and doesn't have a say what color you are or what gender you are, I think that's when we win. So I think that's where it comes back to this conversation, why it's so important to have positive role models in science, doing science, and we present it to young children when they're most impressionable, because when they see people like them reflected in films doing cool things, they say, hey, I want to do that too. And I think we win.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's how we get to start. That's how we get to Gene Roddenberry in the future.
Well, this has been such a great conversation. So I want to make sure everyone knows where to follow you, because I'm like, oh, wait, it's already been 45 minutes almost. So I want to make sure everyone knows where to follow you, because you also have your own podcast. So please share a little bit about that as well, so they know where they can hear more about our universe.
Yeah.
So go ahead, share all you can.
The podcast is called Our Island Universe, and it's a play on different words I won't get into, but I just like the idea that it's our universe. We're the ones that are figuring it out. And the podcast is short. It started off as being a show that played on my regional NPR station. So it fit into this like 90-second window that they had, and it's growing a little bit more because we've got a little bit more time. So it's 3 minutes. But the idea is just to introduce a short idea, to tell you a little bit about it. And I tell myself that if I get you going to Google to learn more about that person or that telescope or that whatever, then I've won, because I've got you going to Google to find out about science versus your favorite Hollywood actress or actor, right?
Hey. They inspire people, these favorite Hollywood actors. True. We get to play the parts that people want to be.
When we get to the point where all the, there's a lot more the science and engineering films coming out and they're playing those roles, I'm going to change that stereotype. But you're right.
Okay, great. Well, I was going to say, they're not looking up what to shop for. How about that? We're going for sustainable fashions.
Yes, right.
And since Earth Day's coming up, recycle, take care of our planet. Is there any parting words you'd like to share on that point as well? Like
on climate change?
Or just in science in general, anything that you would want to share with our audience, just so they maybe you can be like drop that hint of more things they need to make it entertainment at science.
Well, I would just say that, we talked about how scientists sometimes are portrayed as being different from the rest of the population, which is not true. Science isn't something that also just happened now. I think, our species has been around for some 250,000 years. And that's just we're recent to the scene. Our planet's some 4.5 billion years old. Mm-hmm. So we've really just emerged on the scene. But you think about that 250,000 years, and we've made a lot of progress. We've come a long way. We're a nomadic species. It's clear that our species started off on East Africa, but as soon as, we originated on the scene, we explored, we left, we traveled the oceans. I don't know when the first humans actually crossed the ocean. It wasn't Columbus, right? I don't know when the first humans left East Africa. There weren't any books. I don't know when the first humans, settled the Americas, although there's certainly a lot of evidence that it happened some 20,000 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well before Columbus. But I do know that the first day that our species set foot on another world, that was July 20th, 1969, right? When two white men, set foot on the moon. We have not sent a single woman. I tell this every time I give talks to young kids. I often ask them, how many men have set foot on the moon, and I'll get some number. How many women have set foot on the moon? And they refuse to believe that, in the 21st century, there's not been a single woman. And that hasn't. But that's going to change by the end of this decade. We have plans. NASA has plans to send Americans back to the moon. That's the Artemis 3. Artemis, of course, is the sister of Apollo. That's
a goddess.
A goddess, yes. And so we'll send
another thing I loved, mythology, which is also in that sci-fi world. So I'm glad that maybe more of that will come through.
It is. And so this is part of I think this is part of who we are as a species. We're explorers. We don't sit still. We wander. And by the end of this century, we'll have wandered to our moon and to the nearest planets, because that's what we do. That's who we are. And we can continue to put our head in the sands and ignore it, or we can be a part of that incredible story.
Yeah, I love it. Oh, and of course I have to ask, because you did mention it. I forgot the name because it's way too many letters and consonants and vowels, but the moon rock thingy.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
I barely got your name right, Shanil Virani. I don't know if I even did that right, because I was like, oh, it just looks pretty, but how do I pronounce that? I'm dyslexic, so letters and all of that,
right?
It moves, so bear with me.
It took me a long time to pronounce that word too, and I'm probably still butchering it. So the telescope that found this interstellar visitor, this object, was a telescope atop Mauna Kea, Hawaii. And so there's, of course, been a lot of grassroots organization and outreach amongst the telescopes and facilities that use Mauna Kea, which is a sacred site to the ancient Polynesians and to the current Polynesians. So they're trying to use ways to make connections. Again, back to this conversation we had. And so one way they've been able to make contact is to actually, when they discover new objects, is to use ancient Polynesian words or this Polynesian language to identify these things, new discoveries. So Umwamwao just means scout, or first visitor. And by looking at the orbit, just the path that this thing is following, we can figure out its speed, and we can figure out roughly where it came from. And by looking at its dynamics of its speed and its orbit, it's clear that this thing didn't originate in our solar system. So it came from outside, from some other solar system. And what got a lot of attention in the last year and a half is there was a Harvard PhD scientist, but just goes to prove that just because a Harvard PhD says something doesn't mean it has any merit to it.
Yeah, we're learning. Anybody can get in with the right Photoshop.
Right.
Not necessarily Harvard, but just in general.
That's right. So he suggested that this was an alien spacecraft with no evidence to support it, just because it's some weird things that we didn't understand at the time. And it became disappointing because, of course, every time, especially when you have, and he's a very reputable, very well-known, made prolific contributions to science. So he's not some, nut job. So you have this Harvard PhD astronomer saying it's aliens. And so, of course, it gets picked up by the press. And this, unfortunately happens quite often. We discover something new. We don't understand it. And so we jump to these great extrapolations that have to be aliens, not recognizing that science is much more boring and prosaic and mundane. And with time, better models come out, better ideas come out that can explain it without having to resort to aliens. And that's, of course, exactly what's happened in the last month. There's been a couple of papers suggesting that this is just a kind of a weird nitrogen ice, and nitrogen ice may sound weird, but it exists on the surface of Pluto. So, there's a great example of something small and insignificant in our solar system, Pluto, having it. And so it's not out of the realm of impossibility that this is just some kind of weird ice exhibiting weird properties and not some alien spacecraft. But you don't hear that. You hear the Harvard PhD says this rock is an alien spacecraft, and never, the follow-up is never taken up, never presented to the public. But so Umwamwao is very exciting for a whole number of reasons. One is that it's not from our solar system. So being able to understand, what the chemical makeup is tells us what was the constituent ingredients around another solar system. So understanding it is really cool, but it's not aliens.
Okay, and then all these different meteors that are coming through the middle of the night that are scaring people, that it's an alien invasion. Are we,
Yeah, so
is it,
that's
what was that movie? I just remember the Aerosmith song. I don't want to
oh,
sleep another
Armageddon.
night. Armageddon. Are we getting
Yeah,
ready to have Armageddon? Do we need Bruce
yeah.
Willis
So
to save us?
we started off having a conversation about great science fiction flicks. Armageddon and The Core would be on the list of the worst science fiction films, right? It is just really bad,
It made zero sense. Like, I'm going to drill a hole in it. What?
But the funny thing is, it's more of how we so used to living in urban cities, urban landscapes. We go out on a clear night, we see maybe 10 stars and think that's normal. Maybe we go out to suburban skies or rural skies in the summertime when we go vacationing or go camping with the kids, and maybe we see 10 stars or 100 stars and we think, oh my gosh, it's so much darker. Not recognizing that for much of our human existence, we lived outside. We lived around a campfire telling stories. That's what we did. We didn't have Xboxes to play or Netflix to entertain us, right? The night sky served as that. So we lived outside. We saw this vista with thousands and thousands of stars. The Milky Way, our home address in the galaxy on a moonless night, is bright enough to cast shadows. That's how bright our galaxy is. Yet 8 out of 10 Americans now never see the Milky Way with their own eyes where they live, because the way we light our homes, towns, and communities competes with our ability to see the stars in the Milky Way. So, and I think we lose something. I think, coming back to this other point, how do we get to train our minds to think about bigger and more than ourselves? I think if we can get back to looking up and seeing the night, seeing the stars, that's been the source of our inspiration, again, since the beginning of time. It's inspired our art, inspired our theology, inspired our philosophy, and of course, it's inspiring our science today. But we're so disconnected from each other. We're so disconnected from the cosmos and the natural world that I think we've lost something in how we live today.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I took my daughter to a planetarium a few years ago in LA. I want to call it the Getty Center, but I don't think that's what it's called. I forget now, because
Griffin Observatory.
Griffin Observatory. Yeah. I'm like, I knew it was a G word, but I know Getty's pictures, and of course, being entertainment. Right. I've been looking at Getty stuff. So, and I think even when I was looking up the different things you were talking about, it was on Getty's website that I saw those stuff. But anyway, they were talking about the night sky and how it almost looked like moving pictures, because stars, they're burning, so they are moving around, and how the first citizens, how they are the first humans, and how they would have thought of those being different mythical creatures and would write about it. It's just like, and just seeing that, it's so important to really support your local museums and planetariums when they're open, of course, because even locally you can get the benefits of learning just more about our history and how important it is, like you said, just to look up, because that made my daughter download an app. And now every once in a while during the summers, we go outside and sky watch and see if we can find our constellation that goes with our birth month, or different characters she might read in her different mythology books. And I love Marvel shows and superhero shows. So even with that, we'll kind of do. So like, you just never really know where you can find inspiration and what curiosities can build from that. Because we even like bought these different books with glow in the dark constellations and stuff within it. Yeah. And just all kinds of different things. Like we went on a whole thing, like, you hate to admit it, but Jeff Bezos' website, like you could just look for things and find books and all kinds of things that might fit in that category to really inspire. And I know as a kid, my mom would have to paint. Thankfully, she's an artist. She would paint dolls or different things to make them the same color as me. So I never really knew how little there was out there, because even Mozart was brown at my grandmother's house. Because we bought her like a marble bust when we lived in Germany of Mozart, and we went to her house. I was like, well, Jesus is brown too here. So maybe in America, you get to pick whoever, you get to pick the races of your people.
But that's the hidden figures, the larger hidden figures, the conversation, right? Is that you're right. I mean, when I was growing up, seeing a blonde, blue-eyed, white Jesus was never something I gave a second thought to. But now when you think about it, it's like, hang on a second.
You're right.
2,000 years ago in the Middle East, a blonde, blue-eyed, white person, that doesn't seem that would make sense. Right. But it's true. There, we have hidden figures, not just in terms of, in the case of the film, that chronicles the contributions of 3 African-American women that were pivotal in getting 12 men on the moon. But we have hidden figures in the sense that we often think of it's a particular culture that does science, not recognizing that that's not true either. The ancient Egyptians that built the pyramids, 5,000 years ago, and those are aligned to the cardinal points with a remarkable accuracy. It wasn't aliens that did it. They understood the motions and the patterns. They could read the sky, both the day and the night, like a book, and they could figure this out. We just celebrated, celebrated, I guess is the right word, the first day of spring, this past Saturday. Chichen Itza, which is this beautiful pyramid-type structure in Mexico, on the first day of spring or the first day of fall on the equinoxes, the way that they have their pyramid structure and these steps looks like a serpent rising or descending down from the staircase. That was built more than 1,000 years ago. Again, it wasn't aliens. It wasn't an accident. They knew, how to create and produce an engineering marvel that also could tell a science story. So our ancestors are very adept and very good at reading and using it. Of course, in the past, being able to know that winter was coming was very important. You needed to have the wood to burn, the water to drink, the food to eat, right, to get through a northern winter. So, and in the spring, you would need to know when to plant, when to harvest, right? So you were very attuned to these patterns. You're right. It's again part of our everyday lifestyle that we look to a piece of paper on the wall to know what the calendar it is, what season it is, right? We look to our phone to know what time it is. We could do this by looking at the sky on a clear night, of course. They could do that. And so oftentimes, especially now, one of the things that interests me is, when I was taught world history, like in the middle school time frame, right? It was the Dark Ages. Remember that period? Right? Between like the Greeks and the Romans and the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, was a dark period, right? The Dark Ages. And that characterization is just not true. It may have been the Dark Ages in Western Europe, but at that time, in the Arabic world, in the Islamic world, science was thriving.
The
much
pyramids, everything, right? Yeah, because
that was 2,000 years before then, but still.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
But the Greeks and the Romans, they had certainly made seminal contributions to the works of Plato and Aristotle. To that they exist today, and that we know of them was because when those civilizations fell, that work was translated and transferred to Baghdad, with modern day Baghdad, and those works were then translated from Latin into Arabic, and then to later languages. So that work was preserved. The science was not only preserved, but there were Arabic and Muslim scholars that contributed and made advances. And so this idea of a Dark Ages is not true. It was certainly maybe true in Western Europe, but there were parts of the world that were thriving and were making seminal contributions, and in fact ushered in the scientific renaissance that started in the 16th and 17th centuries and played a critical role. But we don't tell those stories, right? There's another hidden figures part. We don't tell the stories of people that don't look like Western Europeans that made seminal contributions in the past, that and made our modern day society. The word algorithm actually comes from an Arabic mathematician, Shanil Virani, who's actually is considered the founder of algebra, but we're not taught that.
I mean, even it's funny. There was like an article going around at one point, I think, on social media, where they were talking about how people wanted to give up Arabic numbers, and I was like, wait, huh?
Roman Sanskrit numbers, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, you do realize that's the numbers that are on your keyboard. It's not like, they were very confused that algebra and so on. Yeah.
Try doing arithmetic with Roman numerals. Go ahead. Exactly. Take 15, an X and a V, and take 7,
my dyslexia, that's not happening.
Yeah, try and do arithmetic with Roman numerals. You can't do it, right? That's why you need Sanskrit numerals. That's why it became popular and became the currency of mathematics, is because you can do arithmetic with it, right? No, it's again ignorance, right? I think that's what science education allows you to overcome.
Well, this has been a great conversation, and we're officially right at an hour. So thank you so much. We could talk forever. Please let everybody know where they can find you on Twitter or Facebook and all of the wonderful places that they can find you and keep up with you if they want to continue.
On Twitter, it's Shanil V. It's my first name, last initial. And on Facebook, it's Our Island Universe. And on both these places, but Our Island Universe in particular is where I just try to share stories about our cultural connection to the night sky, and that this is part of our species since the beginning. It's not something weird or different or new. Now, we've been doing this for 250,000 years.
Well, thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you, Camille. It's been a lot of fun.
First year, out of the world excitement. I love this conversation, and it was so much fun talking to you, and I can't wait to talk again, and thanks for being my guest. I really appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Happy anniversary and continued success.
Thank you. I wish I had like party music, but all I have is is my iPhone that gave my husband. I tricked him into thinking I was that I went on eBay. Like this is like 5 years ago. Oh, I'm getting you a special. I got it special made and it's blinged out. This is from Target. Oh, the battery is dead. But I even said it came with Surrey because it's like this creepy zombie voice that speaks and stuff. Needless to say, he was very glad to know that I didn't spend thousands of dollars on an eBay iPhone.
Nice, yeah.
And it was just me.
Really it's like, you used to talk to that and you used to stand at a wall? It's like, yeah, that's
yeah, and I would like be completely surrounded in the wire as you would start talking to people and not realizing.
That's right.
Or having to start over if you started on this thing, right? Because every grandmother had one of these. So my daughter will know how to use one of these.
Actually, you did dial, right? I was lost.
Yeah, you had to know the area code and everything. Those days, you really had to be good with numbers. Well, again, thank you so much for being my guest, and I truly appreciate it. All right, and you have a great night.
You too.
Thank you. All right, everyone. So this has been the E-Spot with Camille. Make sure you follow, like, and subscribe. Well, now follow and keep up with me on CamilleCoward.com, my website. I go live there as well. Thanks to YouTube integration, I can do it on my website, or you can keep watching here on Facebook. I will be trying a new format called Bullhorn. So please download that app. I wasn't able to get it to working today, but hopefully next week I'll be able to do all of it because, it's a lot to do in one computer. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Moving forward, next week, we're going to continue this wonderful conversation in April Fool's Day. We will not be foolish. We're going to talk to, I'm so excited. Her name is Leisha Lux. She is the creator, founder of Real Talk. And her whole point is talking about racial equality. And so we're going to talk about all the different images race-wise, kind of continue this conversation, but talking about how these different stereotypes, how they're breakdown, different ways that they break down on movies and TV shows. I might have a couple of other people from different cultures also stopping by on April 1st. I'm still waiting to get that all confirmed, where they will also speak from their perspective on how they're portrayed in media and film. And just, I don't know everything. I only know what I know from my perspective. So to hear it from others' perspective, I think that's so important, because not only does it mean when you open the door to diversity, you want to hear those voices. So you don't want to just hear my voice saying it. You want to hear it directly from the horse's mouth. That's not inappropriate. Now I have to look that up to see if that's got some issues with it. But anyway, next week, April 1st, 7:00. And I'm too excited to even hold out. So the last Thursday of the month, I will have a former producer from Epic Games, the creators of Fortnite. She will be my guest. I will have a woman engineer, scientist sharing about Fortnite. So go ahead and get your kids, your adults, everyone that likes to play Fortnite, go ahead and get your questions in. Different video games as well. She mentioned if that's above my head brain, but she worked for Epic Games and some other great games as well. So she's going to be talking to me at the end of the month. So next month. So every Thursday, 7:00, tune in, have your questions ready. I'm so excited for you guys to see the lineup next month, because every week is somebody special, but I wanted to share about the Fortnite since we were talking about science, and she is a woman scientist. And today's the last week of Women's History Month that I'll be on air. So I wanted to also explain that every episode this month was a woman except for today's. So, I'm allowed. I'm a woman. Anyway. So thanks again for tuning in. Make sure you tell your friends about the show. Everybody needs to know about the E-Spot. It's been around for a year. It's not going anywhere. It'll be here again next Thursday. I'll see you then. Don't let me be the best kept secret. Share with your friends, especially if they would enjoy this conversation or want to be a part of this conversation. have them reach out to me. And if you know somebody that'd like to sponsor the E-Spot, like the seven stones radio, please let me know, because I am accepting new sponsors. And thanks again for hanging out at the E-Spot with Camille. And I look forward to seeing you next Thursday at 7 o'clock Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific.